Good afternoon, everybody. Alex here, as usual, from the Festival of Enterprise. I am joined by James from Microsoft. We're talking what could the cloud do for you. So James Marshall, SMB Customer Lead at Microsoft Azure. So James, you're going to be covering a bunch of different things today, and you might want to correct me, but including questions people might be interested in, such as why they might want to consider using Microsoft Azure, how it can help me and my business, who can help me get started, or can I do it myself, where do I learn, and some of the tips and tricks that maybe you've picked up as well that you can share with people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So you are broadcasting live from your shed near Reading.
I certainly am. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm in my living room in Poole, having moved the desk in here, so we're all making do. Yeah, let us know where you are today. Thank you, Olasola, coming up from Sheffield. We had David in London, posted earlier as well. So look, keen to get this started. Everybody, just to post you in the right direction, there is a chat box that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Ideally, post up any questions in there, so then James gets to see them. Most people's reaction is to use the question tab, so I'll forgive you if you use that. It just means that I'll have to moderate and copy and paste them on the screen, which is absolutely fine as well, just in case you forget. But if you can, post them up on the right-hand side in the chat box, and then everybody else will get to see them and be able to interact as well. So without further ado, I will hand you over to James. Tell us, what could the cloud do for you?
Thank you. That's a great setup, and I appreciate the opportunity to come along. As you say, I'm in my shed live just outside of Reading. It is a very hot day today. I couldn't have picked a more challenging day to be sat here with lights and everything else to make me look vaguely presentable. But by way of introduction, so yeah, my name is James Marshall, and I am the Azure customer lead for our SMB market in the UK. There's two people that do that job, me and my colleague Petra, and I'm here today to kind of give you a flavour of what the cloud can do for you. And there's stuff that we'll go through. I have some slides that I want to go through, nothing too corporate and heavy. But then I'll come to the end, and then we'll fly through questions. So because I might answer some of the questions you may have as we go through. So that's kind of how I'll run this. And my details there are on screen. You can follow me on Twitter or connect with me on LinkedIn, or if you want to drop me an email, I'm just james.marshall@microsoft.com. I'm always happy to hear from people who are doing interesting things with the cloud or want to do interesting things with the cloud. It's how we tell great stories. It's how we make sure that we keep serving the needs of our customers in the best way possible. If I never hear from people about what they're doing, then I can only assume that everything is hunky-dory and awesome. And so I love hearing real stories and connecting with people. Ordinarily, I'd be doing these sorts of things in person. I love to meet people and shake their hand and say hello, but clearly we're in a sort of weird place right now. And in fact, that's a really good opportunity to be thinking about where the cloud can help, especially as we're kind of all thrust into this lockdown situation, thinking about how we start to get back to work and how we keep our businesses going. The cloud, which is this sort of weird term for that tech over there, somebody else's computer, the cloud can really help. And you'll be pleased to know this is the most corporate looking slide that I have in my whole deck. It is super casual and basic from here on in to really focus on what's going to matter for you. So, first question, why should you consider using Microsoft Azure? And I guess the first thing that we should do in trying to answer that question is understand, what is Microsoft Azure? I mean, it's a term that we use really easily because it describes a whole barrage of different services and capabilities. But the truth is, Microsoft Azure is huge. It's the term for our cloud platform. So it's anything from hosting a virtual machine in our data center for you to run your applications or store your data on at one end, all the way through at the other end to running incredibly complicated, power hungry and large machine learning algorithms to understand and gain insight into data at a scale in petabytes and beyond, and it's everything in between that makes up Microsoft Azure. So when you hear people talk about, oh, we're on Azure, or we're using Azure, or I want to know more about it, actually, you can't really know everything about the whole stack. There's just so much in there. So it helps to break it down into kind of really simple, basic blocks, right? There's what we would call infrastructure, and that's the stuff that everybody's kind of familiar with. If you've ever used a computer or ever seen a server, you are familiar with infrastructure. So it is the simplest replication of how you do IT today. So if you've got a server in a cupboard under the stairs, or you rent space in a data center maybe, or something like that, and you want to put that into the cloud and just replicate that kind of setup, we think of that as infrastructure. The next bucket, which is a bit more advanced but brings some benefits, is what we would call platform. So not worrying about servers, not worrying about networking, not worrying about storage and patching and updating and all that stuff that we would normally outsource to somebody, or we would maybe have an IT person in who's changing the backup tapes and doing that kind of thing. With the platform capabilities, we just want to access the thing that it does. So maybe we want a database, but we don't want to have to worry too much about setting up a database server, or we would maybe want to access the ability to run a function if we're doing some development work. Maybe we're more technical and we want to do some dev work, but we don't want to go to the lengths of setting up all of the back end that has to make that happen. We just want to take our code and run it, that kind of thing. Or maybe we want to host a website, but we don't want all the hassle of setting up a web server. We just want to access our web page. We would use platform services to that. And at the very end, if you make software, if you're the type of business that's making software, creating IP, then there's this whole SaaS model, software as a service. So we just want to rock up and consumers, like Office 365, for example, is a great example of a SaaS service. Or Twitter is technically a SaaS service, I suppose. You don't have to set it up, you just log in and use it. So Azure kind of buckets things up into those areas. And from the perspective of why you should consider using Azure, I guess for me, when I think about businesses and what might be top of mind for them, one of the first things that comes up is business continuity. So how can we keep the lights on our operations? If we are a traditionally on-premises business, we sell through a shop and we do things in a sort of traditional offline way. If we're locked down, if we're shut down, if we're denied access to customers in the same way, now how can we use the cloud to potentially keep our business going? How can we take orders or create a shop front? How can we keep our employees connected? Maybe if they're processing using a desktop, how can we keep them connected even if they're working from home? And Azure creates the perfect set of capabilities to allow you to set up some good business continuity contingencies. And it could be anything from replicating your server's storage into the cloud so you can access it from your computer at home. It could be, for example, setting up a hosted desktop. So if you have applications that you use in your office today, maybe payroll or some other line of business application that really you need to be in the office to access, you could create a virtual desktop environment hosted in the cloud to run those applications that you can access securely from anywhere. So suddenly access to an office or access to a location isn't necessarily the deciding factor as to whether or not you can continue to work. Now you can put stuff into the cloud and then access it from anywhere and kind of from any device. So you've got that business continuity element to things. Next up, it's resilience. So business continuity for me implies that there is some kind of outage or some kind of impacting event. Something goes wrong and you need to keep the business going. With resilience, it's about how do you avoid that whole problem to start with. If a computer fails, if your server goes down, or if the data center you're hosting your application in fails, any number of things goes wrong, how do you make it seem like nothing ever happened, like things just carried on anyway? And again, there's resilience capabilities that the platform has too. So the cloud can allow you to build a high degree of resilience, so that actually, if there are things, little bumps in the road, things that get in the way of technology working smoothly, you've got that covered. Your end users, your customers, your other stakeholders would never necessarily know that something had gone wrong, because we have that concept of the ability to fail over automatically or build in high availability, so your applications, your workflow carries on regardless of what happens underneath. And that's the ideal, right? You want the show to go on irrespective of what's happening behind the scenes. And then this is a contentious one because it depends on how you optimize the cloud, but cost savings are a huge attractive part of moving stuff into the cloud, because done right, you can actually save a huge amount of money by moving your operations into a cloud environment. And people say, yeah, but I can buy a server, for a few hundred or a few £1,000s, and it kind of does what I need. But what you forget, and what a lot of people forget to incorporate into that calculation, is everything that has to be wrapped around running that server. How you power it, back it up, cool it, the people you pay to maintain it physically, and things like changing backup tapes or doing that kind of thing. There's a lot that goes into running on-premises traditional infrastructure. Whereas in the cloud, lots of those things are taken care of for you. You're just paying for the benefit that it brings, which is maybe hosting the application or allowing access to files or running your shop front, whatever it might be. So cost savings of the cloud can vary, but they can save you, potentially done right, save you a huge amount of money. And when I say done right, it's not just saving money on things like heating, lighting, and cooling. It's also the ability to shut things down automatically and scale them up and out as necessary. Traditionally, you would have a server running somewhere and it would just stay on all the time, 24 hours a day. But in the cloud, you can build a high degree of intelligence to say, you know what, between 2 a.m. and 7 a.m., no one needs to access my stuff. So I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to save some money. But maybe between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., I'm going to experience a peak. Maybe I've got lots of users accessing my services, or I've got lots of employees all connected to the same server, accessing the same files, or whatever it might be. So maybe during peak hours, I want to dial up my capacity so that everybody gets a really good experience. And so you basically pay for what you use and scale it up and scale it down and turn it on and turn it off kind of as you need to. And if you want to find out more about these things, I've pulled together some handy links which you can take away and access. So firstly, in the current climate, Microsoft in the UK has published a guide called Supporting Resilient Operations. You can access it there, aka.ms/resilient operations. And it's all about the way that technology can help you work through the situation that we're in today and take support the resilience that I talked about earlier on. The second link there is the Azure pricing calculator. It is the number one question I get asked by customers and Microsoft partners alike, which is, how do I find out how much this stuff's going to cost me? And if you go to the Azure pricing calculator, that's where you can start to figure out how much this stuff costs. And then lastly, for me, the most important is that total cost of ownership calculator, the TCO calculator, because actually it's about being able to see how much you're spending today and how much you could save by moving to the cloud in the future. So aka.ms/Azure TCO will take you to that total cost of ownership calculator, and then you can start to do some interesting analysis off the back of that. Now, before I move on to the second question that I want to answer, I am doing a whistle stop tour. I can't do everything that Azure can offer you justice in the short time that we have today. So I'm picking out some key elements that I think might be most useful. The second question that we're going to come on to now, which is about how do I get started and who can help, that's really where I want to emphasize that this is the key bit, right? Because I would wager that most of you on the webinar today, you're not necessarily IT people insofar as you use technology, you're interested in what technology can do for you, but you're not necessarily going to be the one that's going to sit down with with a large coffee and trawl through documentation and understand how to build these things. And these can be technical things sometimes. There's no getting away from that. So the question of how do I get started and who can help is really important, because I wouldn't expect you all to go away today and start doing this yourselves necessarily, unless you're particularly nerdy and curious like I am. So how do I get started and who can help? Well, the first thing that I would recommend, and you would expect this from somebody like from Microsoft if you've ever come across this before, is our partner network. And in the UK, there is something like 23,000 Microsoft partners that can help businesses of all shapes and sizes across all industries who have all sorts of different needs get started, not just with Azure, but with any Microsoft technology. And they are the absolute authority on the real world implementation of technology. They work with millions of customers in the UK and around the world, implementing their desires for Microsoft technology. So our Microsoft Partner Network is hugely valuable in terms of helping you get started. They can bring their experience of having done projects with similar customers and help you de-risk your projects and your ideas. They can absolutely accelerate the time that it takes to deliver these things, so that you don't have to do it yourself. It's much easier to pay an expert to come in and take some of that pain away. And they can also tell you about things that you perhaps haven't thought about. They can give you ideas about ways to do things differently. They can bring innovation and modernization to your aging infrastructure. If you've had IT in your business for a long time, invariably there'll be technical debt that's built up, just stuff that's the way we've always done things, and they can bring a perspective about how to maybe modernize that you maybe hadn't considered. So Microsoft partners are a massive community of experts that are prime position to help you. And if you want to look for the absolute pinnacle, we have competencies. Our partners, you can just be a regular Microsoft partner, you can be a silver partner or a gold partner, and then we have Azure expert partners on top. So depending on what you're after, you can find partners to suit your requirements and your needs. And I've got a link for you in a second about where you can actually find out how to find a partner near you. But of course, you might say, you know what? I'm up to the challenge, James. I've got some time. I want to have a go at this myself. I'm a curious learner. I want to dive in and I want to get my hands on this today. So the other way that you can do this is self-service. The great thing about this is you can sign up today. You could be live by the time we finish this webinar with your own Azure environment. It doesn't take any time at all to go to the website, plug in a couple of details, and be spinning up your very first virtual machine in a matter of moments. So you can absolutely self-serve the whole way through. And there are lots of businesses that do this. They have the in-house capabilities, they have the passion, the time, and the expertise. They just go ahead and do it themselves. They pay Microsoft directly for the pleasure. And there is nothing wrong with doing that. As good as Microsoft partners are, if you've got that capability and that desire, you can absolutely do it yourself. Now, how on earth do you start doing it yourself if you've never done it before? And the key thing, of course, is to have some learning materials. I'm not just going to expect you to go away from today and go, you know what, Azure sounds great. I'm going to click a button and it's just going to work for me. Of course it's not. You've got to go and do some reading, some understanding, and some learning. And the great thing is that to suit all sorts of different job roles, there are free learning materials that Microsoft provides. So whether you want to know how to administer Azure, whether you want to know how to develop on Azure, or whether you want to understand the business benefits of the cloud, for example, there are learning pathways that are free to access that take you on the journey from literally what is Azure, like how do I spell it, and what's the difference between software as a service and platform and infrastructure, as we talked about earlier, all the way up to how do I write my first machine learning algorithm to analyze data and get some learning from it, and everything in between. So to recap, Microsoft partners, the Microsoft Partner Network is huge. It's absolutely perfectly positioned to help you get started and go on a journey with you over a long period of time. Partners tend to form relationships that last many years. So the Microsoft Partner community I'd highly recommend. Like I said, you can do it all yourself if you want to. And crucially, there are free learning materials to help you along the way as well. And you can find out more about all of those things. Again, I've popped some links together, which I think would be really useful for you. You can find a Microsoft partner there at aka.ms/find a partner, and you can filter based on geography or capability, based on competency, all sorts of different filters that you can apply there. If you just want to crack on and have a go, and you've got a credit card and a bit of time, just go to azure.com. That's how you can sign up, and you could be started this afternoon, and you could build something really awesome in that time. And if you want to learn, if you want to spend a bit of time digging into this, or maybe you've got employees who you want to task with learning a bit more about this, microsoft.com/learn. And that's not just true for Azure. There are learning pathways there for our productivity services like Office 365 and our business application services like Dynamics 365 as well. So there's learning content there across a whole range of different technologies to help you get a bit more understanding. And of course, from there, if you want to, you can go and get certified, which looks great on your CV and really enriches your value if you're a technical person in terms of endorsing your skill sets. So the third thing that I want to come on to is the tips and tricks. So we've talked a bit about what Azure is and kind of tried to break it down into its simplest components to make it easy to understand. And we've just focused on how we can get started, but I've been doing this a long time. I've been at Microsoft 10 years. I've picked up some tips and tricks along the way. There are lots. I could spend all day, as you could probably imagine, talking about all sorts of different things that I've learned. But I've got a couple here which I think are particularly relevant. So what are the tips and tricks that would help you be more awesome? And for me, the first one is the Azure Marketplace. If you're standing at the base of the mountain that is Azure and looking up and thinking, where on earth do I start here? I just want to get on with XYZ thing. Then they have the Azure Marketplace. You don't necessarily want to go and build something from scratch in the same way that you don't go and buy a kit car unless you're really committed to building a car. You just want to go buy a car. The Azure Marketplace is a bit like the dealership. It's got loads of pre-made solutions in there that do all sorts of things that you might expect. Everything, I've pulled out a few examples here, from spinning up a WordPress blog. You know, if you run a content management system like WordPress, and there are lots of other options, of course, then rather than going and creating all the underlying bits and pieces to make that happen, like setting up a database and creating some storage and running a server and then putting all of the middleware applications on it to support the application itself and keeping it updated and secured and so on and so forth. Actually, you just want to use WordPress. Well, there is a WordPress solution in the marketplace ready to go. Similarly, if you're a Citrix user, if you want to use a virtual desktop environment, again, you don't necessarily want to go through the rigmarole of creating all of the back-end infrastructure if you just want to consume the output, which is the desktop. So there's services in there from Citrix and others, Windows Virtual Desktop Native, and all sorts of other solutions to provide exactly that. Almost click to run solutions in that marketplace just to get you started really quickly. And the same for backup. And I mean, there are loads and loads, and you'll see on the screenshot, not just applications that you can click to run, but there's also consulting services from our partners. And it's all broken down into the categories that you might expect if you want to drill into the consulting and applications that sit in the certain areas. Again, there's loads of filtering you can do and searching you can do to find all sorts of awesome things. So the Microsoft Azure Marketplace should be one of your first ports of call after signing up, because there's loads of really great stuff in there to help you get started really quickly. The second thing, which you might think is a bit of an odd one, in that it's so core to IT, but it's not an application per se, is the Azure Active Directory, which is the identity store that everything hinges on when it comes to the Microsoft Cloud. You know, if you use Office 365, our productivity tools, for example, your username and password, that's stored in Azure Active Directory. If you use Azure and you create different security settings for different users to access different things, that's all done with Azure Active Directory. And Azure Active Directory can serve as the identity source, not just for Microsoft services, but for loads of other services. And you can use the single sign-on capabilities to make accessing other services really seamless. One of the biggest challenges, certainly because I used to be an IT admin, right, years and years ago, was users remembering their usernames and passwords across different services. Long before we could easily synchronize between different things, you might have a user who has 5 different sets of credentials to access 5 different services. And of course, you know what? what happens? They either write all those passwords down and stick them to a post-it note on their keyboard, or they forget them. And you end up spending all your time trying to reset them. But Azure Active Directory has some tremendous capabilities to create single sign-on into loads of different services. So rather than have multiple sets of credentials, your users just have one, the one that you give them, which is usually their email address, and they use that one set of credentials to easily access lots of different services. It makes the IT admin's life so much simpler because they just have one username and password to worry about resetting. And you know what? In the eventuality that an employee has to leave the organization for good or bad reasons, it's really simple to shut down their access to things, because you know what? You just disable their user account in that Azure Active Directory or delete them, and it revokes their access automatically. So you don't have that midnight panic worrying that did you delete their access to really, you know, the classic might be Twitter, for example. You know, they're going to go rogue and start sending horrible things out from your corporate Twitter account because you forgot to revoke their access. So Azure Active Directory is a hugely powerful tool for making it really simple to access different services. And then this transcends everything. This isn't necessarily even a piece of advice just for Microsoft and just for Azure, but multi-factor authentication is critical. If you use technology today, which by default is absolutely everyone on this webinar, because we're using technology to interact today, then you should be turning on multi-factor authentication on everything. Your Facebook account, your Instagram account. If you're using GitHub, turn multi-factor authentication on. If you're using Office 365, turn multi-factor authentication on. If you've got a Google account, turn multi-factor authentication on. It is usually, in most cases, free to turn on, with often some paid additional enterprisey features if you need them. But at the basic level, it's free usually to activate in most services cases. And you can get an application for your phone. Microsoft makes one. There are others available. You can even get a hardware key if you want, like a little plug-in USB dongle. You can do biometric authentication, but that multi-factor authentication piece stops so many attacks on your users and on your network, because no longer can people just use a username and password to access your services. That multi-factor piece refers to that additional piece of information that a user would need to sign in. So of course you would go in with your username and your password, but then you would bring in, say, a code that gets texted to your mobile phone, or you'd enter a code that is generated by an application, or maybe you'd use your thumb or your face as an extra factor to prove that it's really you trying to access a particular service. And you will all have experienced the spam emails that we get, the text messages and the phone calls. The level of sophistication in cyber attacks now is unimaginable, and the pace that these criminals are evolving is incredible too. But multi-factor authentication is a really simple, accessible way to secure your environment to a much greater extent without incurring a huge cost. So turn on multi-factor authentication, especially if you're going to use Azure. I of course recommend it, but if you're using services today that support multi-factor authentication, do yourselves and your users a favor, do your friends and family a favor, stop people in the street and tell them to turn on multi-factor authentication, and it will go a long way to preventing identity theft and compromised credentials in your organization. And you can, again, I've put some links together for you to be able to find out more about this. So the marketplace, there's the URL there, azuremarketplace.microsoft.com. You can find out more about Azure Active Directory if you want to at the link that's there. And then, of course, multi-factor authentication. There's a couple of links I popped in at the bottom there for you to go away and have a look at. So we've talked a bit about what Azure is. We've talked a bit about how you can get started and some of my top tips and tricks to help you get started. As I say, over a beer, I could talk to you for hours of more insights into all sorts of cool things that you could do. But as we come to the final section, I want to turn it over now to you to ask me what's top of mind. And I've seen there's been some chatting going on as we go through. So as we get to that, my fourth and final section, what questions have been coming in? What do you want to most know in the last few minutes that we have together that would set your mind at ease or inspire you to get started?
Thanks, James. So David had a question. Probably just relaying, what you just mentioned there. Funnily enough, anxieties and things like that. If you turn the cloud off and somebody needs to access it, what happens? ...
It's a good question, and this is where planning comes in and understanding the requirements that your users are going to have. So in the scenario I painted earlier, I said, well, maybe out of hours you might want to turn everything off. And of course, that's quite black and white, because if it's turned off, exactly to the question, if somebody comes along and needs to access it, they're not going to be able to, because it's switched off. What I see loads of organizations do is they think about what peak time use looks like, and they think about what skeleton use looks like. And so rather than turning everything off, what they do is just keep the lights on, like a night light, out of hours. So let's take virtual desktops, for example. Maybe during the day, they maybe need to have capacity for, say, 50 users. Maybe they've got that many employees to be able to access things all of the time. But then out of hours, they maybe scale that back to maybe supporting, say, 10 users or 5, because they know that some people may have a requirement to access some services, but probably not everybody. So rather than pay for all of that stuff to be on overnight, they maybe dial it back just to provide that skeleton service, and then they dial it up again the next working day for it. That's just one example. But it's a great question. If you turn it off, of course, completely, then yeah, nobody's going to be able to access it until somebody remembers to come and turn it on again. It's all about that plan and figuring out who needs what and when. A little bit of planning makes it all work together really seamlessly.
Thanks. Before I dive into some of the other questions, I'm interested to know any of your personal favorites in the marketplace that maybe even in the last 6, 7, 8 weeks that you've come across that you think might be particularly relevant given what's been going on the last couple of months, or just favorites that you've got maybe.
I mean, so I actually put some of them up on that slide just now. For a long time, I used WordPress to host my my blog, which was really effective. I've actually moved away from that now into something unsurprisingly a little bit more nerdy to suit my my desires to constantly stay one step ahead of things. But that was always really good in the past, because I didn't need to worry about that. So I could just click, give me a WordPress blog, and I was good to go. The one that actually has been hugely popular in the last few weeks, especially given where we're at, is our Windows Virtual Desktop offering. So the ability to spin up a remote desktop really quickly and keep people accessing technology, that's been hugely popular amongst a lot of customers, big and small. They're top 2, but there's loads, right? I mean, there's any kind of content management system. I've set them up in the past, and they are a real pain, because there's just so many moving parts to make them happen. Actually, just being able to come along and click a button and have it go. So there are alternatives to WordPress, of course. They just make life much more straightforward. There are loads of other kind of software as a service type overlays as well. So some of our partners have created some great pieces which not just provide the service, provide the application, but they also provide a managed service on top. So they'll not only surface their application through the marketplace for you to just go and click and access it, but if you need to, they can also provide you the IT support and the updates and everything else all through that marketplace experience. So it just makes things much easier. Long gone are the days that you need to roll your sleeves up and map out, what the architecture needs to look like. You can, of course, like I said, you can do that if you want, but the marketplace makes it so that you don't have to.
Thank you. Question from Paul, who says, as a small business owner, I'm trying to evaluate what scalable technology platform I deploy for the next phase of growth. Why is Azure over AWS or Google or whomever?
Again, a fantastic question. And, I wondered whether or not to touch on that earlier on. I thought that it might come up as a question at the end. So I'm glad. Thank you for asking. And it's a tough choice, right? There's some great cloud providers out there, and Microsoft, Amazon, Google, there are other cloud providers. They're all providing high scale, really useful cloud services. For me, the reason why I think Azure is better than the rest, it's actually a couple of things. From a technology perspective, as a geek, I'm wearing the brand. I would say it's our scale. Azure is in something like 54 regions around the world. And I say something like because that number is constantly getting bigger as we invest in the scale to make sure that our services are accessible everywhere that your users are. So we have that global scale of data centers and regions around the world to make sure that we are on everywhere that we can be for our customers. And we're bigger than the other cloud providers combined in that regard. So just the sheer scale and the technology capability is impressive and capable. But then thinking more about what might matter to a decision maker, it's the certifications and attestations and trust model that Microsoft operates. So we take our responsibility as a cloud provider super seriously, because we want you and your customers to be able to trust that when your services are running in our data centers, we are adhering to all of the stringent requirements that your industry may have, or all of the government requirements that may be placed upon us, or all of the industry requirements that we may need to adhere to. So we take that very seriously, and we're very transparent about the way that our data centers are run, about the way that our cloud is put together. So there's that element to it, and then I mean, there's a lot to this question, but for me, the other side of it as well is thinking about the ecological and carbon footprint impacts that using the cloud can have. So using a data center of a hyperscale cloud provider like Microsoft is better than doing it yourself in terms of carbon footprint. But the difference between Microsoft and many of our competitors is we have gone way above and beyond from a sustainability commitment perspective to ensuring that we are not harming the environment. And indeed, we're undoing any harm that we may have created over the last several years. Microsoft formed in 1975. And just this year, our CEO, Satya Nadella, announced our intention that by 2050, not only would we be carbon neutral in terms of operations, but indeed we'd be carbon negative in terms of outweighing all of the impact that we've had since the day we started as a business. And we've been hugely transparent about our aspirations there. That is a big task to try and get to that. But it's that kind of commitment that says, you know what, not only do we back the cloud, not only do we think that it's the right place for you to bring your stuff, but when you bring it to the Microsoft cloud ecosystem, you're investing in a company that's committed to ensuring that the impact on the world and on climate change is wholly positive and in the right direction, which our competitors are not necessarily as forward thinking or as committed to that publicly as perhaps we've been. And I'm really proud of that fact as well. But there are lots of other factors as well, of course, but they're the ones that speak, I think, the biggest differences.
Thank you, appreciate it. Got a bunch of questions to ask you here. What are the roles implemented in Windows Azure?
The roles implemented. So, I mean, from a technical perspective, if I think that's where the question is kind of aimed, users can have all sorts of different roles, and you can be very granular. You could be, for example, a user that is only interested in understanding the cost, so billing. You have no capability to create or delete stuff or access data. You're just there to read the bill, basically. You can have, uber god mode administrators who can go and create stuff and delete stuff as they see fit. And of course, you can be anywhere in between. So you can have, we call them resource groups. So you can have your cloud broken up into chunks, and you can say that some users can access some of this stuff, but not others, or some people can create stuff but not delete. And you can even go to the extreme, which I actually think is a really good thing to do, of creating like permitted templates. So often what can happen is that you get a really enthusiastic IT person who gets given access to Azure, and they maybe go and spin up a whole bunch of stuff because they're really keen to try something out, and then they are maybe less diligent about turning something off, or about right sizing based on the actual capabilities of what they need. As an administrator in Azure, you can define templates to say you can create stuff, but you can only create this stuff, which is a subset of everything. So you might pick up a couple of virtual machine types or a certain type of storage or whatever, and you can say you can create as much of this as you like, but only of this type. And it just allows you to put some controls in. So you can be highly granular. It's called role-based access control, and you can be incredibly granular. There are pre-canned roles out of the box, of course, but you can define those to a high degree of customization depending on kind of what you need.
Great, thanks. Question from Olusola, who says, can you get email service provider from Azure?
So that's a really, that is a question that comes up more often than I would have thought it might, which is, of course, you can build IT services on Azure, so it makes sense. Could you build an email service on Azure? And of course, the answer to that, strictly speaking, is yeah, absolutely. If you wanted to provision a Microsoft server, a Windows server and stick Exchange server on it and run that, or you wanted to bring an open source mail solution to the cloud and run it there, yeah, of course you could do that. If I were to be really honest, though, I would say that you'd be mad to do that, because email is one of those things that is really, really well handled by Office 365. So Exchange Online, which is our software as a service application that's part of Office 365, is our enterprise leading mail solution. And I can't think of a good example of why you would want to use a build it yourself option when hosted Exchange is available directly through Office 365. So the true answer to the question is yes, you can. You could build it yourself. You could, but the real world experience would say you'd be mad to, unless you had a really watertight reason why you'd need to. The better thing to do is take Office 365 and get it that way.
Yeah, makes total sense. Thanks, James. Ben says, is there a mobile app or is it just for desktop?
So in terms of accessing the management portal of Azure, there's a mobile app and it's available via the browser. Obviously there is, if you're a bit more technically inclined, there's a whole command line set of tooling as well if you want to script and automate things and navigate via the command line. So the way you administer Azure is that command line, browser, or mobile interface. But of course, what you build on Azure can be accessed all sorts of different ways. It might be via a remote desktop, it might be via a web application, it might be via a mobile app. It really depends on what you're putting onto the platform. But the way you administer it, the back end, is a command line, a web browser, or a mobile application.
Okay, cool. Another question: for small businesses, cost is a massive issue, and especially during this crisis. Azure sounds like it could end up very expensive after you factor in partners, etc. My experience is IT deployment almost always overruns and overcost. How can you mitigate this?
It's almost as if I paid Paul to ask that question. It's so well positioned, because you're right. The risk of any cloud is that it can run out of control. And I talked earlier about how you can put those restrictions in place around who can do what. They're really important to put in place, because the last thing you want is to give somebody access to the toy box and then have them go crazy with it. So there is an element of due diligence and process that you have to put around this, but there are really easy ways to mitigate some of this, and in fact really intelligent ways to help you right size, because the real world experience I see from a lot of customers is what they can do is they can assess their environment prior to moving to the cloud, and that assessment will tell them what it should look like in the cloud. That's a really good way to do it. It takes time to do that. It involves a bit of work to build that assessment, and often if you need to move quickly and rapidly, you don't necessarily have that time to do that assessment. So the other way that I see customers go is they just move as is to the cloud. They just lift and shift everything the way they've got it today, move it into the cloud, and then what they do is they use the tooling. So there's things like Azure Advisor. They run it in the cloud for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever, and then they use Azure Advisor, which is a built-in tool, to assess the environment that they've created in Azure, and what it will do is help them right size it. So that advisor will give you insights to say, you know what, you've probably provisioned way too big a virtual machine for the actual utilization that you've got there. Maybe you want to downsize it, or you know what, this virtual machine is being run ragged. It's not big enough. Maybe you want to upsize that one. And so that Azure Advisor really helps you make sure that the environment is optimized as best that it can. And the comment on partners, Partners obviously will charge for their work, but that's where the modernization bit comes in, because they can help you understand whether running a full fat server, like for example, is the best way to do something. They may be able to say, you know what, if we just modernized a little bit here and tweaked a little bit there, we could shut down that server permanently, and we could move to a platform service, like for example a database. We could move that to SQL as a platform service, and we don't need to run the server in the same way anymore. So partners, while they charge for the services, the actual return on that investment can be huge, because they can work with you to ensure that you're optimized and modernized as you go on the journey.
Cool. The question is, you probably get a few of these questions that we are getting, but how long does it take to learn Azure?
Oh man!
If
I had an answer, I'll answer it this way. I'll say it's impossible to learn all of Azure, but you can become very proficient in the key elements of Azure in tens of hours of learning, and then obviously from there you can decide where you want to spend your time. So to get to that fundamentals level of understanding, that's a couple of dozen hours of reading, understanding, learning, and then you could take the Azure Fundamentals exam if you wanted to and have a certification to your name.
Right.
However, if you wanted to become like a really seasoned, deep knowledge expert in a particular domain, that might be many months or indeed years of a combination of learning and real world experience and stuff that money just can't buy to get you to that level. And indeed, I work with solution architects who've been working with Azure since the day it was created, and they are deeply knowledgeable and experienced. But there's no tick in the box. The platform always moves forward, and there's always new stuff to learn. And so this is why I said about you can do it yourself or you can work with a partner. The knowledge investment has to be continuous. There are some principles which very rarely change, but as new capabilities arrive or existing capabilities get extended, there's always new things to learn. And if you're naturally curious, that's a great incentive, because there's always more stuff to consume. But actually, if you just want to use it, that's where a partner can help, because they do all of that learning, all of that knowledge, and they apply it to help you.
Another question: does it require any coding skills to get started with learning Azure?
Absolutely none. My mum, who is the least technically capable person that I've ever met when it comes to computers, even she could spin up a very simple virtual machine or blog or any number of things. There's no code required to get started. Can you code? Of course. And can you do some incredible things with code? Oh my God, yes. And can you create the most awesome capabilities by using some scripting and some coding? You bet. But do you need to? Is it a requirement? No, not at all. Would I recommend it? Yeah, sure. Once you get to a certain size, things become a bit unwieldy. So code can be a huge benefit in streamlining the way that you run your cloud, because you can perform an operation that let's say you got like 10 servers and you need to update them or make a change to them. Without code, you might have to go do that 10 times, log in, do the change, log out, log in, do the change. You can imagine how long that would take. With a little bit of code, a little bit of scripting, you could maybe write one line which would do it to your whole environment in a matter of seconds. So code can massively help, but if you've got no experience in coding, that doesn't mean that you can't get started and do some amazing stuff.
Thanks. It's probably a relevant one right now, given furloughing and redundancies, etc. But I had a question that's coming on the question tab here again that says, which is better for job opportunities, AWS or Azure?
I'm going to say Azure, of course, because I work for Microsoft, and you would expect no other answer. But that said, the market is wide open for technical people and skilling around cloud technologies. I work with a number of partners and customers, and all the time the question is, how do we find talent that has the certifications and has the skills to help us do this? And it's really hard, as an employer, to find somebody to bring on staff who's already got those skills is really hard. If you are one of those people, the world is your oyster, and it doesn't matter whether that's on Azure or AWS. Cloud technology in general is in extremely high demand. Of course, I'm going to say that Azure is the way that you should go, absolutely. And indeed, our partner ecosystem in the UK employs more than 250,000 people, and the need. I mean, I've seen some of our biggest partners increasing, doubling, tripling their number of technical experts around cloud because they need to address that customer demands that they're working with. But the key thing is, if that's the way you want to take your career, invest in the learning, get the certifications to back it up. Those certifications set you head and shoulders above others in the market, because they're the endorsement that you know what you're doing at a certain level. It's not just about the experience; it's also being able to back it up with the skills to show that you can do things too.
Great, thanks, James. Just finishing things up, I've just put out any last questions. Well, whilst we also just wait to see if we get any last questions, we do ask everybody who comes on here as a speaker a couple of questions, couple of rapid fire questions, if you don't mind tucking into those.
Go for it.
Couple here is, so if you had £1 million to invest in an industry today, what industry would you pick, James?
Oh man,
big question.
Big question. Oh man.
So it's interesting because your answer is going to be very different from some of that CEO we've just had in in the food industry, for example, or founder in the retail industry. So have a stab.
Tech. I mean, hyperscale tech. So big, the big companies, they're doing very well, and Microsoft's stock price is at an all-time high and continues to grow. And the companies behind that, so like people like Nvidia, they're doing very well. Streaming is obviously. Companies involved in streaming is huge. You've got to look at what's happening with Disney and the awesome work they've done, and Netflix and others. They're absolutely ones to watch. That subscription ecosystem, that recurring revenue business, companies that play in that space. I mean, they're doing very well, I think. But for me, because it's my passion, I would have to say that the big hyperscale tech companies.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? When I was reading that. I think it's Amazon's biggest revenue generator now is Prime, which is like £7.99, isn't it? But it's something like half of America's population is subscribed to it, let alone everybody else.
Exactly.
It's insane. Okay, the other one, again, and I guess just personal preference. If you had £10,000 to start a business idea today, what kind of businesses would you be interested in starting?
That's a really good one, because funnily enough, I was thinking about this just the other day. I think that in the UK, when I look across the US, the fintech, the personal fintech industry is really there's some great companies that are coming out of this in terms of being able to help people with personal budgeting, automate banking transaction imports, and applying intelligence to help them be better with money. I think in the UK we're missing a trick. There's loads of great startup and challenger banks, and there's kind of some overlay companies, but the open banking stuff that's capable now. I'd love to see a really good application or service to help people be better with their money that is done right, and helps young people get a better grip on money, and helps people plan better. I think one thing that this situation that we find ourselves in now has taught us is that even the most studious savers have not necessarily always been as financially resilient as they could be. So I think if I was to have 10K to start my own business, it'd be looking at how we could take the learnings from the last few months and build the right solution to help people be better with their financial planning. But that's just me. That was something I was
thinking. That's a great answer.
So,
I haven't had that one. That's a good answer. And just been doing the Go Henry apps with my kids, and it's funny. Like one is clearly as soon as fast as it comes in, fast as it goes out, whereas the other one managed to literally hoard about £300 save for one thing. So it's quite interesting. But again, I think they're probably And again, whether that comes out of this, who knows as well. But changes to the education system. I'm sure there's been, there'll be loads of learnings off the back of that, won't there?
Oh, huge learnings. I think there's so much that we need to be able to prepare young people for, that we perhaps didn't prioritize in the past because we thought, oh, it'll never happen, or it's not as important. They can learn that later on or whatever. But yeah, that'd be my bet.
Yeah. Well, listen, been great having you on. No last questions pinged in, but you've answered quite a few there for us as well. John's just added. Oh yeah, okay. You can try it out, Office 365. He's put a link there. Brilliant. Okay. Neil, thank you. Very interesting session delivered with passion. Paul says thanks. Ben, okay, great. Thanks. Olasola, thank you. Okay, those are great comments. And again, I mentioned to you before, if you want to send anything over that we can send to everybody who's registered as well, we can send that out as and when. I know you maybe, last slide, you've got some links on that people can take a screenshot or a photo with a phone.
I'll send you the links over so you can share those with everybody.
Awesome. Okay, and then last, have you got a slide there again? Just people to connect with you. I think you had it up at the beginning.
Yeah, let me jump back to the first one. There we go. There's my details.
People can take a screenshot or photo. There we go. Brilliant. Wonderful. Well, we're pretty much bang on 3 o'clock. So thank you once again. Maybe you can get out of the shed and get some fresh air.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Day in a couple hours, maybe.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We're back again tomorrow with at least 2 webinars. I'm trying to think what we've got. Wednesday, I believe we've got a 12 o'clock and a 2 p.m. In fact, I know we've got a 12 p.m. and a 2 p.m. tomorrow because I'm hosting them both. So I'll be posting up tomorrow morning, as always, what we've got coming for that day, but you can check at festivalofenterprise.co.uk to get a full schedule of what we've got coming up this week, and then a shortened week for the bank holiday next week. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed, and thanks again, James.